It's time to talk about nutrition. There's a million different diets out there. It's super confusing to know what to eat, when to eat it, and then who to follow and trust about information. So we're going to take a different approach, and I'm going to teach you some principles and things you can implement into your daily life that cost zero money and will allow you to choose what you want to eat, the way you want to eat it, and when you want to eat it. And that's track it, bracket, and then learning about sleep, stress, and stimulants. Because if we didn't already know, a lot of people's issues with eating is emotional reactivity or something deeper, and the eating is purely just a response after the trigger's already occurred. Now, we talked about in the Mindset Masterclass about our OODA loop, which is observe, orientate, decide, and act. Now, when we're talking about reactivity, and whether it's eating, drinking, or adding some sort of response after the trigger's occurred, it's important to understand and drill down into why we're doing what we're doing. Because if we don't fix the root cause or the issue that is actually causing us to overeat, undereat, not manage our schedule, we're simply just going to go on that cyclical diet life cycle where we simply lose a bit of weight, we get fat, we hate ourselves, and we go back around in a perpetual motion. So most importantly, with these key concepts, track it, bracket, and sleep, stress, and stimulants, we want to measure them. We want to be able to track them accurately to observe what our responses are to our triggers in our daily and weekly lives. If we can then track it, we can then measure when we have an issue or when we have a blowout, and then work on fixing the root cause as opposed to just trying to treat the response. Now, it's important with tracking. We track things in a way that's easy for us to recall and reflect on. Now, if we're going to track our nutrition or what we're putting in our mouths, simple apps like MyFitnessPal can fit the bill. Making sure you've got all the settings correct in there is important, otherwise it's going to give you the wrong metric. But the key part or functionality of an app like MyFitnessPal is simply just recording what you eat and not have any goals attached to it. By not having any goals attached to it or weight loss targets, you can just simply observe and watch what you're doing. Now, if we're starting on this journey, this is step one, just tracking by putting no pressure on yourself to then adjust or become super strict on what you eat. We're simply tracking and observing. We're also aligning that for our stress and our stimulants in our life. So if we've got busy work lives or we have a significant event in our life and we know we have nutritional blowouts or caloric blowouts, we can tie it to those things. And then if it's something we can negate, i.e. by getting more sleep or drinking less coffee or drinking less alcohol, that's things we can actually manage to work out getting rid of or removing the trigger. Once we've spent a decent amount of time tracking what we're eating and just simply becoming aware of our triggers and our responses, we can then look at establishing a bracket. Now, a bracket's super useful because we're not looking at a finite number that we have to stick under on a caloric value. That might be protein intake also, but if we sit on a window, it alleviates the pressure to always hit a certain number. By having a window above and below that number that we want to hit, if we get into that window but we slightly creep above, that will stop us for having the attitude of, oh, I've blown my calories for the day, I'll just keep eating and I'll start tomorrow or I'll start next week. So that will help remove that destructive cycle that we have of when we have a bad day, we let that snowball into bad days or bad weeks. By working out what our bracket is, i.e. a couple of 100 calories underneath and a couple of 100 calories above our ideal window for what our goal is, whether it be weight loss, weight maintenance, or weight gain, we have a comfortable window to land in, and it relieves that stress of making sure we hit that number every day when we just land in a window, and we can make sure that's a sustainable approach over the long term. The reason being is because it's all about the 80-20 principle. Now, 80% of our days should be moderated, we should be good, we should be able to hit that window. And then some days we're simply just not going to make it. We're going to blow it. But by having that average approach over the long term, It will make it far more likely for us to achieve it because we're not putting stress around a certain number, but a window, and we're using the average over days, weeks, and months instead of just the daily target. So we've gone through track it and bracket. You're probably thinking this is way too simple to actually be solid advice. And unfortunately, you're wrong. The reason why it's so simple, before we get into sleep, stress, and stimulants, is to alleviate the stress and misconceptions you're fed every day. So by giving you simple strategies of tracking your calories and not doing anything about it, makes it a stress-free approach. And then once you're ready to make that big jump and start bracketing your calories, once you do your education, you work out what your ideal intake is for your goal that you want to achieve, and then it gives you the window that you can fall in every day, you can then focus on sleep, stress, and stimulants. And it's all about removing those poor decisions we make by winding everything up too tight, like we traditionally see on challenges and other online fitness programs. So the sleep, stress, and stimulants part overlays the track it and bracket sequences because we can track our sleep and work out if we're getting enough, if we're recovering enough, which also promotes fat loss or muscle growth depending on our goals. And then also that's going to negate the stress side of things. Too often when we go down these challenge paths, they give you a restrictive meal plan, it's too low in caloric intake, you feel tired, lethargic, and that vicious cycle of the blowout occurs. So keeping it super simple, when we're looking at our stress, we want to track our daily stress metrics, work out what's going on at work, in our personal and professional lives, and then try and negate some of those things using our OODA loop concept and remove some of that stress in our life. We can do that by automating or eliminating some of those elements like we talk about in our Mindset Masterclass, but it's really important to understand your stresses, which will form those triggers, and then ultimately your responses, whether it be with food, alcohol, or other things, and you'll be able to track back and deliver on the root cause and change those behaviors, which will break that cycle of the emotional eating response. Next, we have stimulants. Are you using uppers and downers like coffee and alcohol to get you through the day? Now, quite often when we use those stimulants, it's to get us to a certain point in the day or to relieve our stress from a hard day's worth of work, and therefore the cycle of overeating continues. Obviously, there's a lot of calories in alcohol. It's also a depressant. And then if we look at coffee, if we have too much coffee, that can promote an excess production of cortisol in the body, which causes jitters, anxiety, and other follow-on effects. So being mindful of what our stimulant intake is, particularly even on a social media aspect, whether we're using social media to provide that dopamine hit, which will then obviously keep us on and addicted to social media, that's a stimulant as well. So we need to be mindful of the things we're putting in our life that take us away from making smart decisions when we're tracking and bracketing our nutritional intake. It's all about awareness, team. As you can see, if we track our calories and we don't move on until we're happy with what we know we're doing and we know our emotional responses to what we're eating, we then establish our bracket and we take a nice conservative approach over the long term. Shooting a long-term goal that's 6-12 months down the track is far more advisable than a 28-day challenge. And then we track those things that are causing stress if we're medicating with stimulants, and also making sure we recover with adequate sleep and other recovery strategies. We've got a far better likelihood of actually achieving a body composition that we're happy with and that we can sustain over the long term. Making sure we don't adhere to what we're seeing on social media, because everyone represents themselves in a positive light, and we have techniques such as airbrushing, which gives people an unrealistic expectation of how they should look or what they should be doing in relation to their fitness on a daily basis.